Hi everyone, Prenday here, and a very big welcome to Prenday Talks Health Episode 2. Following on from our last video called In the Beginning, I'm really pleased and excited to introduce our guest this week, Chris Dimitrovitz. Chris is an experienced holistic health and wellness coach who practices quantum health, and I know how keen Chris is to share his knowledge with both us and our viewers on his specialist subject.
Hey Chris, welcome.
Hi guys, thanks for having me on your show. I'm pleased to be here to speak with you both, and I just want to say that I love the videos so far, and I really love what you guys are doing. I truly believe that you're going to help a lot of people with the information that you're putting out.
Hey, that's great, and thanks, Chris, and welcome today. Great to see you. I know obviously it's very early in the morning over there in Canada. We're sort of midday here with some beautiful sunshine, but if we could start just by going back then really to our last video. Obviously we're extremely interested to hear your take on some of the subjects that we discussed, but obviously before we do that, maybe you can give us a brief introduction to what people call you as the Iceman or the Energy Man. So yeah, over to you, Chris.
Yeah, for sure. It's been kind of a long journey, and I guess I would say it started out in my late teens, early 20s. I basically just wanted to look and feel my best, so I did what most people would do in that circumstance. I started going to the gym 5 to 6 days a week. Lifting heavy weights. I started focusing on my meal plan and nutrition. Prioritizing sleep, taking lots of health supplements, trying to manage my stress levels as best as I can. So I kind of adopted that, healthy lifestyle for a few years. Now, it's kind of interesting, given what happened to my health after many years of, adopting such a healthy, so-called healthy lifestyle. I found that I started to become very exhausted, and my health kind of spiraled a little bit out of control. So in my around 23 years old, I ended up with low testosterone, and I had some fertility issues. I went on to have full-blown adrenal fatigue, so I was basically just extremely exhausted. I was an emotional roller coaster. I didn't feel great all the time. And then I went on to develop severe leaky gut syndrome. So I was basically sensitive to, basically anything that I put in my gut. I was extremely sensitive, had a lot of stomach pains and bloating. And the only way I could really manage it was with a very bland, kind of boring diet. I suffered seasonal affective disorder, so I'd get into these deep depressions in the winter time. I had a sluggish thyroid, brain fog, just couldn't think clearly. So, it didn't really make much sense to me, because I knew how dedicated I had been. Now the only plus side is I looked pretty good naked. That's the bodybuilding lifestyle, of course, right? So that was the main focus. But I didn't have any answers as to why I was feeling the way I did, given that I was literally doing everything right. And I would look around and I'd compare myself to some of the other people who really neglected their health, and they kind of lived a sedentary lifestyle, and they actually seemed to be healthier and happier than myself. And I said, this doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So of course, I'm somebody who likes to do a lot of research and a lot of digging. So I definitely didn't give up, but I knew I needed to kind of take another path. So anyways, fast forward a little while, and I ended up moving my family out by the countryside. So we moved out of the city. We were in a small townhome. It was kind of cluttered. There was a lot of people around us. We didn't have very much property, and my wife and I decided we were going to relocate. So we built a new bungalow in a nice kind of estate homes area, and we have a nice acre-sized property with trees all surrounding us. So very different environment. And I'll never forget the first night sleeping in the house. waking up that morning, it was, it was an incredible experience. I mean, I woke up to the sunlight shining in through the windows. We didn't have any blinds or curtains yet. It was the first night we were there, and we didn't have air conditioning, so we slept with the windows open. So I woke up to the sun shining in my eye. The smell of the fresh air, the birds chirping. It was the best way to wake up, basically. And I remember the first thing that I did, I looked over, and in our master bedroom, we have all these windows that overlook our big backyard with all the trees. It was just a beautiful view. So I remember waking up, and I walked to my bathroom, and I poured myself a glass of water. And of course, the water comes directly from my well, so it's coming from the ground. And I just remember it was the best tasting water I've ever tried in my life. And then the next thing I did was I have a door leading outside on our big back deck. So I walked right outside, and I walked out into the sunlight, and I felt that sun on my bare skin. And I just basically admired my new kingdom. I was, just in awe. And it's really funny because I noticed a rabbit kind of scurrying out of the trees, and he just kind of stood there for a minute, and he looked up towards the sun, and then he proceeded to kind of munch on some grass or some food, and it just literally just hit me like a ton of bricks, and I just realized, wow, my environment has radically changed. I was living in the city, in a densely populated area. With just so much traffic and noise around. And, for the first time ever, I truly believe that the way I woke up was the way that, we are intended to wake up every single day. I mean, I completely followed the rhythms of nature. I woke up to the sunrise, drank fresh water that was just so pure, that came right from the earth. I breathed in the fresh air surrounded by trees. So the way it hit me was when I was observing the rabbit, because he's doing the same thing. So I realized now that, I've, without even really realizing, I reconnected myself with nature that day. And it was incredible how different I felt just overnight, in that sort of environment. And so this was really the beginning of my journey. And I would say it was the end of my search for, what was causing my illnesses, and it was the beginning of my journey toward healing ultimately.
So basically, in short, then, Chris, what you're saying is that in the modern world that we live in, particularly in the Western Hemisphere, even people who are trying their best to become healthy really don't have the right guidance or the right route, because they're thinking, well, if I just eat my 5-a-day veg or just pop down to the gym, what you're basically saying is that the simplest way for us all to be healthy is to reconnect with nature.
Absolutely. I mean, we can't really argue evolutionary biology, because that's what got us there today. But if you look at the past 100 years or so, the environment has radically changed. And I think the big problem is, humans were the smartest species on the planet. And that kind of backfires on us, because we're the only species that are capable of actually altering our environment. Now, the problem is when we do these things, we create an environment that we're no longer adapted to. So our cells and our biology, they're very confused as to what they need to do to regulate themselves in an altered environment.
This is really interesting.
It is, absolutely. It's something that nobody thinks about today, because, we have such busy lifestyles, and we go on with our day. And I mean, I know that conventional wisdom, there's certain things that, there's certain pieces of the puzzle that are correct. I mean, of course, you should eat good, healthy foods. But there's so much more to it than just that. I mean, if you are on the best diet, but your environment has radically changed, and your sleep-wake cycle is off. I mean, how far is that really going to get you? Being on the best diet. I mean, I can speak to that firsthand. as you know, an exercise maniac, you know, I've never seen somebody work as hard as myself in terms of, you know, my dedication to eating healthy and living an active lifestyle. And, you know, look where that got me, because, you know, I was living a completely disconnected life from nature, right? So it wasn't until I started to reconnect to nature that I was able to really regain my health and my energy.
Okay, Chris, so as we mentioned before, people call you the Iceman and the Energy Man. Obviously, we've had these conversations, I understand that, and I think a little bit later in this video, if you could maybe talk a little bit specifically about the, let's call it the cold treatment, and obviously we've covered the connection with nature, which is where you are saying that energy comes in its simplest form by connecting with nature. And I think to put some structure now to the rest of this video today, what we agreed was that the last video that Kean and I put together was, we said, let's start by going back to the beginning. So just to cover a couple of topics to get your views on this then, is that we mentioned, Kean and I, last week that, you know, to understand chronic illness, and we're talking about chronic illness first of all, because there's plenty of people talking about typical illnesses. And I think that, again, to use nature to work with chronic illness, let's start at that worst case scenario. So we said that, you know, to understand chronic illness, you'd be better off if you understood life itself. So, you know, let's put to one side for today whether there's a Big Bang theory or the creator's theory. Let's forget about global warming or religion, politics, which all these things do have an impact, positive or negative, or in a negative way, against our health. But first of all, let's go back to your views then, really, of, you know, first life forms and the evolution of humans. It'd be great to hear your opinion on that.
Absolutely. So the way that I understand it is that the way life began was it actually happened in water. And this is why water is so important. It's so critical. It has a very special component. But basically the way I understand it is there's these little bacteria that existed at the very bottom of the ocean. And how it all worked was that there was these hydrothermal sea vents that released massive amounts of heat. That was actually infrared radiation. And what this form of radiant energy did is it actually split the water molecule. So if for people who might not know, water is composed of H2O. So you have two hydrogens and an oxygen, and that's a molecular bond. Now, this radiant energy actually split the bond. So what that did was, you know, every chemical bond is made up of atoms, and atoms are made up of subatomic particles. So you have electrons, which are negatively charged particles, and you have protons, which are positively charged particles. So what had happened is this radiant energy would split the water, and it would actually free up an electron. And electrons move when they're excited by light energy. And ultimately, that's really what drives life. Is it's the flow of electrons from point A to point B, and really that's what drove life at the time. Now, my understanding is, you know, as the sun aged, you know, it began to kind of reach its middle age. It started to emit stronger light frequencies, such as ultraviolet, UV light. And what UV light has the power to do is it can actually ionize matter. So what over time, the interaction between the ultraviolet rays from the sun hitting the ocean, it actually started to bring oxygen from the water to the land, and that's when we started to see rising levels in atmospheric oxygen. So that kind of created an explosion in new life forms to bring life from the sea to the land. This is what brought more complex life, creatures that breathe in oxygen, because as I mentioned, energy flow is really when electrons move from one state to another state. And it turns out that oxygen is a very special gas. It has two unpaired electrons in its outer shell. So what that means is it's actually looking to recapture two electrons. So the way that it gets those electrons is when electrons are freed up from another molecule or atom, then it kind of acts as a magnet to kind of pull those electrons from somewhere else. And that really is the drive of energy that that drives these life forms that breathe oxygen. So that's really kind of my understanding as to how it all occurred. And of course, the source of electrons really come from the hydrogen within the water. And the interesting thing is that people like, I should say, species like humans or animals, what we do is, as I mentioned, we breathe in oxygen in order to have a way to pull electrons. And the interesting thing is, as I mentioned, those electrons come from hydrogen. And since oxygen is looking for 2 electrons, it can get those 2 electrons from hydrogen, and now you have H2O. So if you think about that, it's very interesting, because in order for life to take place on the land, it actually makes water. So humans and animals make their own water, and it's a process called cellular respiration. And when we burn our hydrogens, which come from the food that we eat, we actually make water inside of our cell. So we're kind of completing this kind of cycle of life, or this puzzle. And really the key about having water, and every cell in our body is designed to make its own water, is that water is really what captures sunlight energy, and pretty much creates the battery that runs life. So water and sunlight really are the keys to all the energy flow that can occur on this planet that drives all the life forms.
Well, this is obviously fascinating stuff, Chris. And to say you've only just got out of bed in the morning in Canada, you clearly wake up obviously with a clear mind. Again, we've just discussed the Iceman, the Energy Man. I think again, obviously, they're the quantum health guy. I'm sure that a lot of our viewers will be interested to hear your take on the true understanding of life itself. And I think this is where we need to move this on now, to look at that understanding. How can you not have an understanding like that? And then when someone questions, what is a chronic illness then? Well, chronic illness clearly comes from the fact that you're not connecting with nature, and we're living in this very, what I would term, a false environment, particularly so much so in the Western world. Now, I know Kian's got quite a few questions he wants to ask you today, and I think that, no doubt we can revert back to the subjects that we've just discussed today, because they are really in relation to the cause and how people can potentially beat forms of chronic illness. So over to you, Kian, with question number 1.
Why do you think that 1 in 2 people are getting some form of cancer today?
Well, it's a great question, and I think it kind of goes back to what we discussed earlier. The environment today has radically changed, and just explaining the way how does life exist. I mean, it's the flow of energy from point A to point B. And as I mentioned, the environment really drives that energy flow. So like I said before, we need water and we need sunlight, and then of course oxygen, right, to basically create that energy flow. And so when we alter our environment, right, and we put ourselves indoors, I mean, modern humans spend 90% of their time indoors, under artificial light or poorly lit environments, when we're designed to be, living in the sun and using the sun's power to drive the energy, from those hydrogens to the oxygen, so we can remake water, and water allows us to, capture the sunlight energy. So, the problem is when you alter your environment and you disconnect from nature, you're no longer getting the adequate energy flow that you need inside your cell to function optimally. And I mean, I'll argue that pretty much every chronic disease we face on this planet ties back to energy flow, because if we look at life and we look at death, what's really ultimately the difference between the two states? Life is a positive energy flow. We know that's the truth, because your heart beats, right? When your heart stops beating, that's when you're no longer alive. and that's when energy flow stops. So really, what really is illness? Well, to me, it's the gray zone between life and death. So if on one end you have energy flow and the other end there's no flow, then to me, illness is basically the state where you're approaching death. So energy flow is slowing down. And the reason why energy flow would slow down, as I mentioned, is you're not getting sunlight. You're not, drinking enough clean, healthy water. You're not breathing enough oxygen and fresh air, and maybe your diet is, you're eating, processed foods that, were not actually created in nature and maybe were created in a laboratory. So you don't even really know what you're getting. So everything we do today and the environment that we live in today is really altering the energy flow inside our bodies. And, this is basically creating the illnesses we see because, when the energy flow slows down, we begin to approach, the death state.
So I think that to sort of put a layman's terms on that then, Chris, I think that if we look at basically, let's call it our body's terrain. So, sort of if you've got a body that's functioning healthy and well, there's almost this blockage, isn't there, with modern day illness. What it's saying is that our bodies automatically want to look after themselves. And once some form of illness then has started to develop within a person, you're continuing to really feed that illness. We've had this conversation recently, Key and I, about, the mitochondria, the powerhouse of cells and how cells themselves function. And if you remember, Kian asked me the question last week about longevity. Well, exactly right. Sort of if your cells are suffering from oxidative stress, inflammatory stress, what you're really doing is you're blocking the energy flow through your body and allowing all the various types of chronic illness to start to develop and continue on. But, we're going to do individual subjects on the future purely about mitochondria and about the stress upon the cells in our body. We're going to talk about individual illnesses and what we think was the cause of that illness. But more importantly, how do you actually beat that illness? Because I think there's really three areas that you and I discussed when we had a chat a couple of weeks ago, is that when we're talking about health being such a massive subject, there are so many stages of people becoming ill, but also many levels of people accepting that the way I feel today is okay. Well, you don't just need to feel okay. You can really feel exceptionally well. So you and I have discussed before almost three levels of, let's call it maintenance, and then prevention, and then actually beating your illness. So if we look at, for instance, the 80-20 lifestyle, where people can say, hey, look, I do most things good in the main, well, the chances are you're preventing some form of serious illness. But as time goes on and as age goes on, 80-20 is not going to be quite good enough. But then if you develop a serious illness, you really need to be on it 100%. So you need to look at your emotional stress. You need to look at your diet and your lifestyle, your sleep pattern and sleep routine, the stresses you may have in your life, and also how your body's connecting with nature. And one of the next subjects we're going to be talking about, probably I would imagine in episode number 3, where we'd certainly like you to join us again on this, is that for us to be able to look at how people live in general, really what we're saying is that before we just used to take nature for granted, but yet today we live in what we're terming this toxic environment. Because even though you get up in the morning and maybe go for a walk, if you're not getting the right amount of sunlight, and if you're not eating the right amount of food, and your body is under, the stress, not just from the lifestyle that you live or the people that you share your life with at home or at work, is you can live in an environment which is actually not conducive to a general healthy lifestyle. So I know Kian's got a particular question on technology, which is having a massive impact on us. So over to you, Kian.
Why should we all be so worried about 5G technology?
Well, it's a big subject, and there's a lot of controversy behind it. I think a lot of people don't really have a true understanding. So, there's certain scientists that are kind of, they're concerned and they're worried about the biological effects of introducing these, these new high frequency, this high frequency energy to the environment. And I mean, I'll be honest with you. 5G, what it really stands for is fifth generation technology. So right now, most of us are living in a 4G world. And if you look around at all the illnesses you see today, I mean, it's no surprise that things are only getting worse, and technology is ramping up. So is that a coincidence? I truly don't believe it is. Based on what I know, and from an evolutionary perspective, and from nature's view, I mean, we are designed to receive energy and information from the environment, okay, from the sun, and the sunlight frequencies, and the Earth's frequencies, of its own magnetic field. And that's just the way that life had adapted, over the course of billions of years. So when we begin to introduce these non-native frequencies from technology, it's going to create some interference for sure. Our cells are looking to communicate with nature so that they can, make the changes and the adaptations that they need, to maintain that positive energy flow that we spoke about earlier. And so when you start to introduce all these frequencies, that we can't see, and we can't really feel them. The problem is these frequencies are speaking to our cells without us really realizing it, and they're creating some confusion in our cells, I believe, and disrupting the natural signaling that we get from the sunlight. And so if our cells, it's creating, I think, a lot of noise in our environment, and if our cells don't get the right signals, they don't know how to behave and how to adapt properly to the environment. So I think this is causing massive alterations in our energy flow, creating damage in our mitochondria. And the problem is these frequencies, there's no off switch for these frequencies. The sun doesn't shine 24/7. It follows a natural cycle, and we're designed to sleep when the sun goes down. Because obviously, you can't fall asleep. You're not going to fall asleep when the sun's shining in your eye. It drives wakefulness, right? But the problem is when we're surrounded by these frequencies from 4G and the upcoming 5G technology, these frequencies are bombarding us 24/7. There is no off switch. It's not like these frequencies go away and we can get a restful sleep. So if our bodies are trying to be in a low stress state so that we can sleep and regenerate, and we're surrounded by these frequencies, it's not going to happen. So chronic exposure to this type of stress is going to lead to the chronic diseases that we see today. And with 5G, I think it's only going to get worse because of how high, they're ramping up on these frequencies. And we don't know what the biological effects might be. It's basically a giant science experiment on the population, and it's very concerning.
Thanks for that, Chris. And I think, as we've said, there's so many subjects that we can discuss, and I think that if we put together again the question of 5G technology and external influences that are affecting our biorhythm, I think that this is going to be a great topic of conversation for episode 3, which we're going to call The Toxic World That We Live In. But to just slightly change the subject now, then, I know that Cian's got another question for you, which I know you'll probably make a little bit of light of this. I remember us discussing before that the great thing about being healthy is sometimes, for want of a better word, you can occasionally abuse yourself. So your next question, Cian?
Why do some people think that living a healthy lifestyle has to be boring?
Well, I think that ties back to our misconception on what it truly means to be healthy. I think that I've given you the perfect example with the lifestyle that I've lived. Hitting the gym 5 to 6 times a week. Being really strict on my diet and sleeping. I mean, a lot of people will say, I don't want to, spend all that time in the gym. Like, I'm too tired and exhausted. Like, I don't have the energy to do that. And I don't have the willpower to eat good food. Like, that's boring. I want to go out and indulge a little bit and splurge and this and that. And like, I don't want to sleep, 8 hours a night. Like, I want to stay up a little bit later and, like have a few drinks or whatnot. So I think that there's a misconception that you have to be so strict in order to be healthy. And, what I've learned is that, the more I've started to reconnect to nature, the less effort I actually had to make. So, as long as I was following, the natural rhythms of nature and reconnecting, getting more sunlight, getting more energy from my environment and less so from, exercise and food and this and that, I started to realize that, I could still have fun. I could still, party and whatnot, as long as I was in the right environment. So really, ultimately, I think it comes back to, the environment that you live in. And, if your environment is really good and you're able to harvest a lot of energy directly from your environment, then, if you want to have an extra piece of cake or a glass of wine or a beer every now and then, or stay up late, I think you're totally okay to do that. If your system's running extremely well, because you're getting proper rest and regeneration, then you're going to have more resilience to stress. But if your environment is chronically stressed, and you're disconnected from nature all the time, then it's going to wear you out, and you're going to have to do a lot more. You're going to have to make a lot more effort and be a lot more strict and make certain sacrifices in order to be healthy in that environment. So if you just change your environment, then ultimately you start to realize that your energy levels just go up naturally, and it doesn't really matter some of the things that you do. You can get away with a lot more. As I mentioned, you're a lot more resilient to stress. So I really think that the environment is the key, and we need to start teaching people that if you get in the right environment, then you don't have to do all these crazy things and take all these supplements and spend all this money on your health, because Mother Nature, she intended for us to always be healthy as long as we follow the rhythm.
And I think there's a few points there as well, Chris. Then it's like we've used this word before, haven't we, about balance? So to get your life into a good balance. I think the problem with Western philosophy is, they consider that balance is just eat your 5 a day and everything's okay. And, one of the reasons why I'm seriously enjoying this conversation with Kian and watching some of the changes he's made. One of his friends at school the other day says, I saw you with a can of Coca-Cola, or I'm not sure allowed to say that, we're not advertising, or a carbonated drink. And what Kian was saying is, hey, I drink 5 or 6 glasses of water a day, so I can have an occasional carbonated drink. And I think that what I'm saying is that the process that we are trying to go through here with you and with Kian, it's not an education process. It's really a re-education process, isn't it? The way that we have lived our life so far is pretty much been by default to say, hey, that's just the way it is. But it doesn't have to be that way. And I mentioned to you earlier is that I think that we've really forgotten how to live and forgotten how to be happy, forgotten how to be healthy. And one of the comments that I made with Kian just a few weeks ago was that life is a habit. And it really is. The habit that we used to take for granted has been changed so much now. And to get that lifestyle, it's a little bit of, I've heard people say, I've spent a month just eating processed food and taking no exercise and staying up late and playing video games. And after a month, I felt seriously, seriously ill. And I said, well, you will. And if you'd spent a month going out walking every day and getting up in the morning sunrise and eating healthy food, that habit becomes natural as well. It's a little bit like if you've had someone drink 4 bottles of beer and have a processed food takeaway and eat a cake and a chocolate bar, and then you say to them, would you like an apple? The chances are they'll go, no thanks, give me another beer. Whereas if you spent a month eating natural organic food, drinking clean water, taking regular exercise, all of a sudden that habit changes and you think, do you know what? I really don't feel like a piece of cake. I do feel like an apple. And I think that, again, we'll talk about this in greater detail, but making simple lifestyle changes eventually, you don't need to say to people, stop doing that, because automatically they'll go, I really don't want to do that. And then again, as you say, from time to time, what does it matter if once a week you decide to actually grab a takeaway, or, once every couple of weeks you have 2 or 3 beers, or as you and I know, to have a glass of wine can be good for you. Yeah. And the problem that we've said before about health, it really is such a detailed subject. Is a glass of wine good for you at what time of day? Is it right to drink and eat certain foods at the right times of day? Yes, it is. Because all we're saying is that we're working with many people like yourself now and talking to people and saying that when you want to fine tune something, then you really do need to do that if you're ill, because you can't just take chance or just say, hey, do you know what? I'll pop and see the doctor and I'll get a pill or I'll have a magic bullet. There isn't a magic bullet. A headache tablet might take away the headache that you've got today. It'd be better to understand why you had the headache in the first place. But anyway, lots more things that we need to discuss. And I think Kieran's got another question.
Sure.
Could you explain to me exactly what the circadian rhythm is?
Yeah, that's a great question. So basically, I guess I'll just kind of I'll just kind of explain how it works. So all living things, they absorb light during the day from the sun, and then what happens is that, all that light energy that they absorb during the day, they emit that light at night, and they use it as energy for regeneration. So this kind of creates an energy flow that's completely driven by the day and night cycle, which is controlled by the Earth's rotation, which is a 24-hour period. So this transition period controls both sleep and wakefulness in all living things, and ultimately that's called the circadian rhythm. So upon sunrise, light travels through our eye, and it's absorbed by photoreceptors that basically transform that light energy into an electrical signal using electrons. And that signal travels through the optic nerve to a region in our brain called the hypothalamus, where it reaches something called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or the SCN for short. The SCN is basically the master clock in the brain that acts as a timing mechanism to synchronize every biological process that occurs in our entire body within a 24-hour cycle. So the SCN, our master clock, communicates with every organ in the body to basically regulate some of the following activities or mechanisms: our body temperature, our metabolism, our digestion, reproduction, our appetite, our mood, our blood circulation, activity, performance, and sleep. So all of these processes are ultimately driven by light through the eye. And as I mentioned, every organ that's involved in regulating these processes, they also have their own clock, and that clock runs slower than the master clock, which is the SCN. So sunlight drives the SCN during the day, which is what stimulates wakefulness. And then at nighttime, when the sun sets, the SCN, starts to slow down. And then that relays the message to all the organ clocks to also slow down so that every system in the body can regenerate during sleep. And ultimately, as I mentioned, the systems basically release the light energy that was absorbed during the day, and that energy is used for regeneration, so that the body's ready to wake up for the next morning.
That's why it's so important that we all get sunlight, particularly in the morning.
Absolutely. So really the two sides of the coin to regulate the circadian rhythm is definitely getting that morning signal, because, like I said, we need to capture as much sunlight, through that pathway through the eyes, in order to get that SCN spinning, the timing mechanism to set the circadian clocks. And on the contrary, we absolutely have to respect the darkness in the evening, because in order to tap into all that good energy that you absorbed, during the day from sunlight, you need darkness in order for that light to get re-emitted, to be used to regenerate. So really the key is to wake up to the natural sunlight and get as much of that good morning sun through your eye and on your skin as possible. And then on the contrary, you have to be very mindful of your environment in the evening and make sure that your eyes don't sense any artificial lighting past sunset, so that you can begin to start the regenerative process that occurs during sleep.
An interesting point there, Chris, and I think that to really try and wrap up for today, because we've again said to our viewers, as much as obviously I've got about another 50,000 questions to ask you, we've got to keep this within a relevant time frame. So yeah, let's talk about the toxic environment at the next video in some more detail. I think that one of the things we've certainly learned today, and I hope our viewers have learned today, is that sometimes it's the simple changes that can actually give you such big results, isn't it? One thing I think we want to touch on next week as well is that everything about our environment as well is to try and make our life simpler and easier so we can do more. But are we doing more of the right things or the wrong things? And, LED lighting, a lot of people are trying to save money and save energy now by having solar panels, by having wind turbines. But LED lighting seemed to be a great thing that you thought, you know what? I can knock 50, 60, 70% off my energy bill. But the problem with LED lighting, it falls on the blue side of the spectrum, whereas the original incandescent lighting that people had was more to the red side of the spectrum, which, as we know, is better for our health. So, if you want to touch on that just briefly, and then I've got a couple of parting questions for today, if that's okay.
Absolutely. Well, you made a great point comparing the different light sources, and we used to use incandescent lighting back in the day, and now we're using LED lighting. And the point you brought up is a great point to make. So, without going into too much science, the mechanism that I spoke about when the sun rises and it goes through our eye and it's absorbed by these photoreceptors that drive, the circadian mechanism, by basically hitting that SCN. These photoreceptors are highly sensitive to the blue portion of the spectrum. And it just so happens that the peak frequencies within the blue light range are the same frequencies that the LED lighting sources have. So basically, what that's doing is when we turn on our LED lights past sunset, we're basically sending that exact same signal to the brain that the sun just rose, that it's morning. So that completely flips, our circadian rhythm. It completely ruins all the timing mechanisms in the body, and because the eye is not supposed to sense any light past sunset in order for the regeneration period to occur, every time we create that artificial signal, we're delaying our sleep cycle and ultimately shortening the window of regeneration. So, it's actually interesting, and I think don't quote me on this, but I think this might have come out in 2008 or maybe 2007 that working night shift was classified as probably carcinogenic, and this was classified by the World Health Organization. So the scary thing about this is that if you're using blue light at night from these LED lighting or devices, I mean, to me, that is basically with the click of a button, you're now working the night shift because you just, tricked your brain and tricked your system into thinking that it's daytime. And, you're continuously running those organ clocks when they're supposed to be resting, sleeping, regenerating during your sleep. So it's no wonder, this kind of goes back to the chronic diseases, cancer question you asked me earlier. If everybody has the ability to basically, with the flick of a button, change night back into day, then, it's no wonder that we're getting these diseases of degeneration.
You took the words out of my mouth there, Chris. I was going to say to you is that there are a lot of people, obviously, who are using LED light, particularly in mainstream industry, where you've got people working, as you say, the night shift. That's a massive impact, isn't it? If people used to work the night shift before in a typical incandescent light, I'm still not suggesting that working a night shift is particularly healthy for anyone, because it isn't. Because as you say, you're working against night falls and your body automatically wants to go to sleep, and we've discussed this many times is that stop fighting nature, go with nature, but yet the modern world we live is doing quite the opposite to that. I think an interesting subject there as well, again, but I don't want to go into too much detail today due to the length of this video, but I think we should also be concerned about the fact that all our pedestrian street lighting outside is that even when we turn our lights off at home, you've got these huge LED lights now up and down the general pathway. That also brings me on to another subject I think it'd be great for us to talk about another time, by saying that which things again happen naturally. I know that you're a great fan and you endorse eating different foods at different times, particularly again for people like ourselves who live in the UK, where we have such dramatic changes in the temperature in our country. We go from 30, 40 degrees in summer to -5 in the winter. And I know you have a similar situation over in Canada. But surely then it makes sense to do the same thing as you eat. If in the height of summer you're eating cooling foods, your body recognizes that it's summer. So therefore, in winter time, again, your body really isn't saying to you, do you know what, I fancy a salad. It's probably saying, let's get a broth on or something and eat warm food. But, again, I know you've got so many answers to give to the questions we're going to do, but I think that for today then, I've got a little bit of an announcement to make, which I know has excited Cian this week. He took it in his infinite wisdom to write to a local newspaper to say if they'd be interested in following me and Cian on our health journey, and they said yes. So we're going to be meeting with our local newspaper next week, and they've sent over already quite a few questions for us that they'd like to ask Cian and I about. So I want to really wrap up today on that point, because I think that over the last 100 years or so, certainly since we've seen many chronic illnesses develop, we've not really seen too many cures, for want of a better word. And there's also maybe been an element of restriction, I think, in the way that we all talk about chronic illness, and can chronic illness be beaten or cured? You and I think, are both in agreement. There is no such thing as the word cure for any chronic illness. What it is that we, with the knowledge that we've got collectively together, can empower people to beat their own illness. I think the word cure is a modern thing within conventional medicine that's saying, hey, we can cure you of this, or we can't cure you of it. We don't want to use the word cure. We want to say, how can we help you to revert your body back to being in touch with nature, to allow nature and your attitude and your approach as an individual to change your bodily terrain, to change your lifestyle, to allow your body to actually beat the illness itself. And I'm sure you'd agree with that.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the problem with the word cure, and you kind of already mentioned this, is it's not something that's tangible. And I think people are expecting, to basically be, handed the cure on a silver platter. And it turns out that it doesn't work that way, because, from the perspective that I have, all chronic illnesses are a result of, poor energy flow inside of your body. And, the circadian rhythm and the environment ultimately is what controls energy flow inside of you. So to say, to ask for a cure, when you've altered your environment and you've, altered your energy flow, that's just not the way that science works. Ultimately, if you want to achieve a cure, again, I don't even like to use the word, it's all about restoring energy flow, and that occurs from your environment. So it's just a waste of time to rely on, this magical pill that doesn't actually exist. It can't address the root problem, and unfortunately, doctors can't write a prescription to fix your environment. You need somebody who, has the knowledge and the wisdom to basically explain it to you, how energy flow really works and how you can restore it.
I was about to say it's not rocket science, Chris, but listening to you, sometimes I think it does seem like rocket science. So you've been called the Iceman, which we're going to talk about again in the future, and the Energy Man, but the quantum health guy as well. So you've got a multitude of names, Chris, and I'm sure that when you decide to have one of your nights when you let go, maybe your wife calls you something as well in addition to those three things. Just to finish off for today then, Chris, we've talked again about the freedom, really, of sharing information like this and looking at simple ways that people can make simple lifestyle changes. Let's finish off today by letting our viewers know that there is no restriction on this channel. We're not trying to railroad conventional medicine. We're not trying to accuse or blame people for saying it's wrong to take a tablet, or your doctor or your specialist is not giving you the help or advice you need, because they are trying to do the best that they possibly can. But I think what we're learning today now is that we have this freedom to talk about how many people in the past have tried to do what you are doing today, is to say, hang on, there's a different approach to this. So let's finish today by letting our viewers know that there is two subjects. One is called Big Pharma, the big pharmaceutical companies. These industries were started by the likes of our friend Mr. Rockefeller, a billionaire many, many years ago, who had control of the oil industries, etc. And it's not for me to say so, but maybe he came up with this idea and said, hey, do you know what? Let's sell people this little pill, and this little pill might get them better, or it might not. But it is an industry, Chris, and we need to discuss this. And I think that to discuss the big pharmaceutical industries, to discuss conventional medicine, to discuss whether diagnosis is actually a good thing. And I want to just sort of add to this, if we can today, just before we discuss the final subject, is that if you've actually got an individual, and let's use me as an example right now, let's imagine that today I've got lung cancer. Well, how do I know I've got lung cancer? Well, first of all, is I'm not focused on my lung because I don't know I've got lung cancer. But then secondly, I get up tomorrow morning and I have a little show of blood. And I go to my GP and he says, ooh, that could be something quite serious, or it's nothing at all. The only way we're going to know that is if we go through typical medical protocol now to say, let's go and have a chest x-ray. And the chest x-ray shows some form of a mass. Well, I now want to know what that mass is. And it's the responsibility of the doctor to give me a diagnosis. So moving from this simple chest x-ray, which I don't particularly want to have that done on my body in the first place, that's where everybody else runs behind some lead shelter. They now have got this wonderful technology called a CT scan. Now, I'm sure, well, I'll not make an assumption, I'll ask you the question. If someone was going to give me a CT scan on an area that is now cancerous, and I've got a toxic environment in that particular area, as I have throughout my entire body, because as you and I know, cancer is not related to one area. The next conversation we'll talk about not just natural healing, but let's talk about the word holistic, which means your mind, your body, yourself as a whole. Someone's now going to put me in a machine which is not even 10 times as powerful as a chest x-ray, not even 100 times as powerful. It can be up to 500 times as powerful. Now, wow. Let's not go into that in great detail today, but again, you and I know that you're then rushed into this system of, okay, you've got lung cancer, it's proven that, let's do a biopsy, and let's immediately get you through the protocol of, you're going to now be introduced to chemotherapy, radiotherapy, and I would rather say to that oncologist, what do you think caused my cancer? And is there anything I can do to actually stop it or make changes? And I've heard oncologists actually on record with patients say, no, it's okay. You go back home now and, have another takeaway, have a few beers. It doesn't matter about the other lifestyle things. If you enjoy ice cream, eat it. And I'm sorry, but that's just not true. So in addition to talking about pharmaceutical industry, talking about how people are, to an extent, rushed through conventional medical protocol, instead of sitting down and talking to someone like you and say, hey, Chris, can I make any changes to my lifestyle? It brings us on to the final subject of what's termed the medical mafia. And you and I both know that there's been many people that's talked over the last 100 years about saying, yes, you can make lifestyle changes. Yes, there are things that you can do will not just improve your general health, but will allow your body to actually fight and beat this chronic illness that's been caused by the current environment you live in. So there is a medical mafia. There is big pharmaceutical out there. And I look forward to discussing that in our next episode, which we've agreed to call The Toxic World and the Toxic Environment That We Live In. So unless you've got anything you want to say today as a parting comment, Chris, on behalf of Kian and I, we'd just like to say, fantastic to talk to you today. It's been incredibly enlightening. I know all of us are singing off the same hymn sheet, and looking forward to taking this into future conversations and enlightening people as to the world we live in and why we've got chronic illness and what we can do to do something about that. So thanks ever so much for today, Chris, and I'll leave you to make a few parting words, and I hope that you're going to go and show our viewers today how you jump in an ice bath to keep yourself nice and cool in your currently minus 40 degrees temperature that you've got out there.
Yeah, it can be pretty brutal. Today's not too bad, luckily, but yeah, I just want to thank you guys again. I had a great time being on the show. Again, I just want to say I love what you guys are doing. I think it's really important that we get this perspective and this information out there. And I mean, I think you made a great point earlier when you said, this is not new information. I mean, when people start to realize what it is that we're telling them, I mean, it's not a matter of teaching people what they need to do. It's a matter of reteaching them, because ultimately, back in the day before we had all the, the convenience of technology and started, radically changing our environment, and all the industries that are, looking, running businesses and looking to make money off you. I mean, back in the simple days, we knew what to do. We didn't really have all these distractions. So, that's the problem today is all these new developments. They're basically just distracting us and putting us in this artificial environment. And ultimately, that's what's creating the illness. So we just have to relearn how to reconnect with nature and how to follow the natural rhythm so that we can restore our energy flow and our function. And really at the end of the day, that's all we have to do. There's that side of the coin, and then the other side of the coin, which I'm sure we can get into the next discussion, is to how to mitigate yourself from the environmental toxins. Those are really the two keys, the keys to the kingdom when it comes to restoring your health and longevity. So yeah, it's my pleasure to share any of my thoughts and my insights, and yeah, I really hope that people start to pay attention to this, because I really truly believe that there's a lot of people out there that we can help with this information.
Yeah, and that's great, and it's been really enlightening today, Chris. So I shall leave the final word to young Prendy, Mr. Prendy Talks Health himself.
Thank you so much for your time today, Chris, and we'll see you soon.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, guys. We'll talk soon.
Thanks again, Chris.
Okay,
see you later,
you guys.
Have a nice day over there.
You too.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I would just like to say a really big thanks to Chris for joining us today, and I hope the viewers enjoyed it as much as we did. Looking forward to seeing you all again in 2 weeks' time for Series 1, Episode 3, when we are going to be talking about the toxic environment we all live in. Bye for now, and wishing you all the very best of health.
Bye, everyone.